Hey YouTube, welcome to a special video where I am going to do a teardown and rebuild of a Microsoft Xbox One Elite controller. Now, I have already done a video in the past as a giveaway where I took apart a standard Xbox One S controller, modified the faceplate and the buttons and the thumbsticks and the grips, and then put it all back together and gave that away. This is going to be very similar, but without the giveaway aspect and the fact that it's on an Elite controller, which is slightly different to a standard controller. There's extra circuit boards inside. It's just put together slightly differently. They're not hugely differently, and there are some extra pieces in there. But also what's different here is that I'm not just going to be modifying the faceplate, the buttons, and the sticks and the grips. Here, what I'm going to be doing is changing every external part of this controller. The only thing that won't be any different is the grips and the back of the controller. But the faceplate, triggers, bumpers, guide button, everything is going to be different in this controller. So if you're interested in taking apart an Elite controller to make some modifications, hopefully this video will help you to understand a bit more about how to do it and what you need to look out for when you're doing it to make sure that you don't have any issues. So firstly, let's take a look at the parts we're going to actually need to use. So first up on the screen, we've got a T6 Torx screwdriver and a T8 Torx screwdriver for taking apart the controller, along with a spudger for just prizing off the grips. Now, when you buy the faceplate or certain other bits, you do actually get these tools with those parts generally, so you don't need to worry about buying them yourself separately. Just buy the faceplate and you'll get at least one of the screwdrivers and the spudger. And when you buy internal components such as the buttons, then you'll get the other screwdriver to go with those usually. Then we have the white Elite controller faceplate itself. You can't just use a standard faceplate for this because you have to have that little extra hole for the profile switch. Also, you have the little rings around the thumbsticks, and I believe those are slightly wider to allow a bit more movement in the sticks. Then we have the A, B, X, and Y buttons. With these, they're just going to be a red chrome with no lettering on them whatsoever. So you really need to know your buttons if you're going to do this modification. And then we've got the view button, menu button, and profile select switch. Again, all red chrome. Then we have the thumbsticks. I'm moving over to a red chrome thumbstick with a standard black rubber top and also red accents, which will go into the faceplate. Where you see those bits around the edge of the thumbstick rings, that's where those accents will go. Then we have a red D-pad. Now, when we replace this D-pad, we actually won't be able to use the standard D-pad or circular D-pad that comes with the Elite controller. I will be stuck with just a standard D-pad that can't be swapped on the fly. So that's one of the downsides of doing this particular modification that I'm doing, is that you lose that flexibility with the controller. And the same with the thumbsticks. I won't be able to just put different thumbsticks on because I haven't bought the types of thumbsticks where you can just easily replace the tops like you can with a standard Elite controller. These are just all-in-one thumbsticks. But for me, I don't use those anyway when it comes to my Elite controller, so it's not a huge loss for me. Then we've got replacement bumpers and center unit. Then we've got replacement red chrome triggers, a sync button, which is going to be white. The standard one is green. I'm also going to put a red glow underneath the guide button. So that's what this tiny little bit of acetate is used for. And here are all the white bits that came with the faceplate that I bought. I bought a faceplate and white set, but I didn't want a completely white controller. So these are all of the bits that came with that white faceplate. And as you can see there, there's a red guide button as well, and also a little red sync switch. I wanted to use the colored light for the guide buttons, so I didn't want to use the red one. And also I just wanted to have a tiny bit of contrast with the color. So I'm sticking with the white sync button rather than that red chrome sync button just there. So here is the standard Elite controller that I'm going to modify. This is the one that I had with the grips that came off. And as you can see, possibly just underneath there, the grips are actually perfectly fine. That's because I put these scuff grips on my blue controller and put the grips that came with that controller onto this controller. So I'm going to keep these standard grips on here. But also, as you can see, there's a bit of peeling away from the inner grips there. Based on comments on my Scuff versus Infinity video, I can get some kind of glue that will allow me to stick those down. I just need to cut them into shape. I haven't done that yet. At some point in the future, I'll give it a try. But this is the controller that I'm going to modify. And first, we just take off all the external bits, such as the battery casing, the thumbsticks, and the D-pad. So the first thing we need to do is get the spudger, and that's this little blue gizmo here. And this allows us to take off the grips. Now, we start at the top, just on the inside, and then gradually work our way down it until the grip just pops away. As you hear it click, it's nothing to be scared of, it's just the way it's going to go. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, you'll probably find it a much bigger challenge to get these grips off, but because I've replaced these grips before, they come off a lot easier. So if you don't find it as easy as it looks right here, then don't worry about it. Now, this leaves us with 5 screws that we need to remove, 2 in each grip, and 1 behind that sticker in the battery compartment. And you'll find that 5th screw just in there. Now when you do this, this will void your controller warranty. You must be clear about that. In my Scuff vs Elite video, a commenter has said that if you get a small knife and work your way around the sticker, it is possible to remove that sticker, do a modification or whatever you need inside, and then put the sticker back to make it look like you haven't actually done anything. I have not done this in this video. This is the way I've chosen to do it, but just so that you're aware, you could give that a try if you want to, but if you break the sticker in this way, then you do lose your warranty. Now that we've located all of the screws, we just need to remove them all one by one. We'll start with the screw underneath the warranty sticker, and then we'll move on to remove the screws from the two grips. We put all of the screws to one side and we keep them separate so that we know exactly where they go when we put the controller back together. And once you've taken those screws off, it's very simple to just lift off the faceplate, and that's the inside of your Elite controller, or at least the first part of being inside. Now, as you can see here, there's the white one next to the black one. They look slightly different because the black one has got the black accents just around the outside of the thumbsticks. And they're very easy to pop off. They're just clipped in, so you just pull one off, and there you go. That's exactly how those work. We can quickly just take our chrome red ones, pop them in there to see what they look like. And I think that the chrome red actually looks quite nice with the black. But I'm committed to white, so let's go with the white. So here's the white faceplate. This is a bit of work that we can do in advance of taking the controller apart. We can just put the red accents into the white faceplate ready for later on. And there they go. And they look just as nice there with the white as they do with the black, I think. Let's get a sneak preview of how it's going to look. I think it looks quite good like that, but we are not going to leave it like that. The next step here is to remove the profile button. That's the little profile switcher that allows you to switch between the two saved profiles on the controller. The next steps are to remove the thumbsticks themselves, and those will just pop off. They're magnetized, so they'll be quite tricky to pull off at first. You do have to be quite firm with them, but they will just pull off. You don't have to worry too much. Just try not to break the mechanism that they sit on. The aftermarket thumbstick just sits on there like that, nice and easy, and then just pops off. So now that we've got the faceplate off and the thumbsticks off, we can remove the rear housing of the controller itself, and that should just pull away, but be careful with it to make sure you don't break anything. And there, as you can see, it's slightly different to the standard controller here because there is actually a ribbon cable that goes from the front of the controller to the back of the controller, and that's for the tiny circuit board that manages the paddles. So what we need to do is just gently pull that ribbon cable to the right, and it will pull out from its connection on the circuit board, and that's the back now free to go and do its own thing while we do the rest of the work. We're not going to be touching that again until we put the controller back together. As you can see there, that's the trigger stop. It's quite interesting to see that in action. So here is the front of the Elite, and it looks pretty much the same as a standard controller, except again you've got that ribbon controller. The rumble motors are actually housed here and held in place rather than just being free like they are in the standard controller, and much like the standard controller, we've got two screws that holds this first circuit board in. Take the screwdriver and remove the screw just above the left rumble motor, and then we'll remove the screw from just above the right rumble motor. Remember to keep all the screws to one side grouped together so you know exactly where they go when you're putting everything back. Now, a key difference here between the Elite and standard controller is, again, the rumble motors are housed slightly differently, and they will fall out a lot easier when you're working on this on the Elite. As with the standard controller, you could remove the rumble motors. You can disconnect those wires that hold the motor onto the circuit board, and then you would just solder them back on later. However, I shouldn't be trusted to do soldering, so I'm going to leave them connected to show that you can do this modification without actually having to do that. That's the audio jack that has just fallen out of the bottom. That's fine, that just simply sits in there like that. It looks kind of like a bug upside down, but for now we can just take that out and leave it to one side. So because of those little wires that hold the rumble motor to the circuit board, and the fact that the circuit board is housed with the plastic above them rather than underneath them when you're looking at the controller this way, it means we can't simply just flip this circuit board over with the rumble motors hanging free like we did with the standard controller. So this is going to be a lot fiddlier than a standard controller without taking off the rumble motors and then soldering them later, but we'll show here that it is still possible. As with the standard controller, on the main circuit board that connects to the front housing, there are 6 screws that hold it in place. So remove all of the screws, and again, leave them to one side in a group so we know exactly where they go when we put everything back together. Now the next thing to do is to get the spudger and pop the center casing off of the controller. We just slide it around, pull it away from the clips, and then the housing and the bumpers come off as one unit, which is very handy. You can actually separate them, but I'm going to leave them together. Then also here we have the sync button. We're going to replace that with the white one. We just take that out and put it to one side. Then we can remove the D-pad, and we just get our spudger and just pop that little metal thing away and put that to one side. And the D-pad then just comes off. Next thing to do is turn the controller back over, still being careful not to break these cables that connects the rumble motors to the circuit board. And we're now going to take off the triggers. Now each trigger has got 2 screws holding the trigger housing onto it. I believe this is slightly different to the standard controller triggers because here we've got the rumble motors. So you need to be very careful here with the rumble motors that are in the trigger. As you can see, there are 2 tiny cables at the side that come away from the trigger and onto a circuit board. They wrap around the front of the circuit board and come out underneath just where my thumb is and connect to the circuit board, pretty much where that red and black cable that connects the main rumble motors are connected. So that's the trigger. It just comes off once you've unscrewed it, and there's the tiny little rumble motor. So we take off the second trigger, and this is the first part that we're actually going to replace. So there's our red trigger, there's our standard trigger. They look pretty much exactly the same, just different color. And the trigger is just a straightforward replacement there that we'll screw back in. So we take the screws that we just removed and put the trigger back into place. So we screw the second trigger on, and there we go, that's both triggers now replaced with fancy chrome red ones. So the next step is to remove the front circuit board. That rubber thing where all the buttons go, that is removable, but it's managed to stay in place there, so I'm just going to leave it on there like that. That's the guide button. We're not going to replace that. But let's pull out the view and the menu buttons. They just simply pull out nice and easily. And each of these buttons have different notches at the bottom of them, so you can only put them in specific places in a specific way. So as you can see, that button just has 2 little notches on it, one thin one, one fat one. So it can only go into that hole in that way. And then we've got this button, which as you can see there has 3 notches, so again that can only go in one way. And the A, B, X and Y buttons are exactly the same. There's our standard B button, there's our replacement B button, which has got 4 notches, and it sits in there just like that. And that's the only way it can go in comfortably, and the only hole that it will go in comfortably in that way because of those notches, which is a really handy, clever design from Microsoft to make sure that you don't mess it up. So we're just going to take out each of these 4 buttons and replace them. And as we put the last one in, as you can see, the back of each of those buttons does have a different layout when it comes to those notches. Now let's get our small piece of red acetate. We put that just on the guide button there, and that's going to be what makes the guide button light up red when it's powered up. So with all of the buttons in place, we get our main circuit board. We just slide that into the controller and make sure it's in the right place. Rumble motors are all still attached. And now we just need to screw the circuit board back in. So let's go back to our 6 screws and put each one of them in. We'll start with a screw in the very center, just to make sure that the unit is in the right place. And then we work our way around the controller going from corner to corner. So we start in the bottom right, then we'll do the top left, then we'll do the top right, and then we'll do the bottom left. Then we put this last screw back up in the top middle there. And that's the faceplate back in place. Now, when we replace this second circuit board, we just have to be aware that there are 2 female connectors on the main circuit board and 2 male connectors on the smaller circuit board. These have to clip together in order for the controller to work properly and all go together comfortably. Before we do that, we just put our 3.5mm jack back into place. And again, it just sits in there. It doesn't screw in or anything. It just slots in and will be held in place, sandwiched between the 2 circuit boards. Make sure you put it with the little gold connectors facing up in your direction. And as you can hear there, the circuit board just clicks into place. The next step is to put the 2 screws back into the smaller circuit board. So we'll start with the right hand side and then move over to the left hand side. We've actually done most of the hard work here, and now we put the new D-pad back into place. The D-pad will go in more than one way, but it's designed in such a way where we've got notches on 3 of the directional buttons. So we can only really put it in the way that I've put it in there, with the notches at the top and no notch at the bottom. So we get the small metal directional button surround and we pop that back into place. That should just clip in. There's nothing fancy that you need to do there. The metal clips don't need to go under anything. They're just there to allow it to have that natural press. Now the final step here is to put the white sync button in place and the housing and bumpers back on. And as you can see here, I've separated the bumpers from the housing just because I thought it might make it a bit easier to do. So I put the bumpers on, just give them a press to make sure they click, and that's fine. We put the sync button into place, which simply just slots in there. And I think a bit of the plastic there that holds it in place might have broken away because it doesn't sit in there comfortably like the original sync button did. I don't know how that's happened or if that's normal, but the sync button just, it really won't stick. It really won't stay in place. And that caused me a real problem putting this back together. To be honest, I stopped the video for about 30 minutes while I worked on getting that back in. And eventually I had to get a small bit of super glue, put it into the bit where the sync button actually stays in place. And actually glue it there so that it would stay in position. And then we get the housing and we slot that back on over the sync button. It really is a fiddly job, and it did take me a while to sort out that sync button. And it's only fiddly because of the sync button, so do watch out for that when you do this. But eventually it'll all just clip into place, and it's a matter of putting the controller back together. With all of the new buttons in place, the directional pad there, the new triggers on, and the center unit, we can now put the rear of the controller back on. All we need to do here is get the small ribbon cable and then just gently slide that into the female connector on the paddle circuit board on the rear of the controller. Just make sure you put it in the right way. Of course, don't twist the ribbon. It should be so that the ribbon remains flat between the two circuit boards. So just pop it on there and gently push it in. I'll give it a little pull, just a gentle pull to make sure it's in correctly. It doesn't fall out, so I think that's fine. And I put the back of the controller back into place. You just need to make sure you get all of the little bits lined up. As you can see at the top of the controller, there are some notches. So you just need to make sure that those slide into the right place. And you must make sure that those two battery connectors go into the battery compartment. Don't try and put the back of the controller on with those two metal battery prongs inside of the controller housing. They must go outside the controller housing. So that's the rumble motors back in. So now that we've got the housing back on, let's just put the thumbsticks onto the controller. As you can see, they just slot on nice and easily. We get the profile button, we just put that on. That doesn't stick into place or anything like that. It literally just slots in and will just stay there. If you threw the controller about, it would just fall out, but we're not going to be doing that. That's fine, it just sits there. And there we go, the controller is almost done. Let's take a look at it with the black faceplate, and that actually looks really nice like that, I think. But I've committed to white, that's what I'm going with. Let's put that on and see how it looks. And I think that looks really nice. As we have a look, we can see that the bottom of the controller is just slightly out of line. So we just press it down and it clips into place. Just check that the buttons feel like they work, and they do all press as it feels like they should do. The profile switch slides as it should do. The thumbsticks are moving as I would expect them to move. I can feel the bumpers actually clicking when I press them, and the triggers seem to have the full range of motion that they should have. So now we're happy with that, we can start screwing the faceplate into place. And again, much like the circuit board, we start with the center screw and then work our way around doing the grips. Now with all of the screws back in place and the faceplate firmly connected to the back of the controller, we simply just slot those grips back on and they go on nice and easily with no fuss at all. With the official Microsoft White Elite controller, I don't really like it as much because they've just kept the plain coloured grips on the back, and I don't think it contrasts well with the rest of the whiteness and the white back of the controller. But because I've kept the back of this controller black, I think the grips actually work and contrast with the white really nicely along with the red. So I'm really happy with this. Just check the trigger stops, they do the job. Check the thumbsticks, they're still moving around. The controller feels comfortable to hold, just like it did before. It feels like we've done a good job here. Now let's take a look around the controller. Let's just switch that guide button on, and there you go, it flashes red, which is just what I wanted, that nice little red glow to just really finish off the look of the controller. So I connected the controller to the Xbox, gave it a test. Every button works exactly as it should do. The thumbsticks work, triggers and bumpers work, and I'm really happy with that. I think it looks really nice. Now let's just take a look at the parts that I didn't use, which was this chrome red guide button. And as you can see, the colouring on the top isn't right. It's not a perfect part. And these parts are cheap. And that's the thing when you buy these cheaper parts, is that they're not always going to be good quality. In my Scuff versus Elite controller video, I got a fair bit of grief in the comments about just buying cheap parts, just use them, and what's the problem? Why would I buy a new controller? Or why would I do this or that when I could just go and buy some bits off eBay? This is the thing when you buy bits off eBay. Regardless of what your opinion is on the Elite controller, it is a premium product. No doubt about it. Does it have issues? Yes, people have issues, but it is a premium product. And for me, having a premium product and then just putting cheap parts on it that will fall apart easily or don't look as good just sort of defeats the object. Admittedly, I've done it here just because I wanted to give it a go and show you guys how to do it. I just don't think it's always the way to go. I'd rather keep that original quality or use high quality parts. And quite often, a lot of the bits that you'll buy cheap off eBay or Amazon just aren't good. As you can see there on the guide button, there's an imperfection there in the side of it. Now, you won't see it, but if it was on the top or somewhere else, you'd be pretty annoyed. And yes, you didn't spend much money on it, but still the fact is you spent money on something that either you can't use or it's not going to look good when you've used it. So it's up to you. If you want to do this, then as you can see, it's pretty straightforward and is possible. You can get all of the parts you need on the internet, and although some of them might not be great quality, once they're all in place, for the most part, they still look good and they will do the job. And if that's what's important to you, then these modifications are perfectly good to do. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've been inspired to do a modification yourself, whether to a standard controller or an Elite controller, then please let me know down in the comments. Let me know what modifications you've done. If you've got Instagram or any way of showing pictures of your modified controller, then please share them with me. I'd love to have a look at them. If I get enough, what I might even do is just do a little video showing a subscriber modifications to their controllers, and just show a collection of pictures with your gamer tags or IDs so that people know who you are and what you've done. So if you have liked this video, then please subscribe to the channel and get those notifications to make sure you keep up to date with all of my future videos. Also, if you've liked this video, then hit the like button. If you have watched this far, then I can only assume that you have enjoyed the video, in which case please check out one of these other 2 videos that are currently showing on your screen right now. And I hope to catch you another time. Thanks very much, guys, and I'll see you next time.